Hello, everybody. It is 3:30, which of course means it's time for one of our afternoon STEM shows here at the Headwaters Science Center. I'm Ryan. I'm one of the educators here at HSC. And today, what we are going to be talking about is sort of a follow-up again, like I often do on these Friday shows, to the story, or yes, in this case, less of a story, the book that Lee read on Wednesday. And the book that Lee read on Wednesday was called Saving Animals from Oil Spills. And it was kind of specifically talking about sort of the processes that when there is like a large oil spill, what needs to happen to make sure that the animals affected can, as well as possible, be brought back to health and ideally re-released back into the wild where they can be functioning animals again. It's about, maintaining these ecosystems that have had a pretty large scale, ecological event happen there that is damaging to the environment around them. And particularly, there was a lot of talk in this book about different types of birds and how they are affected by oil. And you can see there's a pelican right on the cover there. But it talks about some other ones. It talks about some penguins. There's a bunch of different types of pelicans, but it talks about some of the other similarly, sea type of animals. Talks about some fish, talks about otters, talks about turtles a little bit. Like I said, there's a lot of emphasis kind of put onto different types of birds. And birds are kind of unique in that they are really kind of specifically negatively affected by things like oil spills. And part of that is because they have feathers, and they also are predators. And so this is something that we can actually see in a lot of environments where there is some sort of chemical sort of taint to it. The thing that we encounter a lot of the times around here in northern Minnesota, we don't really get oil spills around here that happen in our water ecosystems. But one thing we do get a lot of is mercury runoff. And so what we tend to see, and if you come and visit us here at the Headwaters Science Center, you can check out our, there's an exhibit down by the Hermonograph that has a bunch of magnets on it and a bunch of fish. And what that exhibit about is mercury accumulation in the food chain. And if you do play with that thing, kind of do the graphing activity with it, what you'll find, and spoiler alert, I'm going to tell you what the kind of result is, what the visual you end up with is when you do that type of thing, or when you do that exhibit. What you find is that bigger predatory fish typically have more mercury in their systems than smaller, less actively predatory fish do. And the reason for that is that it accumulates, basically. So when a big fish eats a small fish, the mercury from that small fish goes to the big fish. And those big fish eat lots and lots and lots of small fish, so they accumulate lots and lots and lots of mercury in a way that the small fish don't. Birds kind of have that same thing, where they, especially in these aquatic environments, typically are going to be predators of things like fish or shellfish or mollusks and things like that that are affected by the oil themselves. But because these guys, these cormorants, are going around eating, a bunch of shellfish and stuff like that, that have oil on them, then they also end up ingesting a bunch of oil. The other part of that that's kind of interesting is the fish are kind of unique in that they end up interacting with stuff from kind of all the way throughout the water column. And so an activity that Lee did yesterday, visual, and we'll see that again here in a second when I do something similar here. But Lee did a thing yesterday where he poured oil into a glass of water here, and what we saw is that the oil all settled on top. That tends to be where the birds are going to be hanging out. You don't see very many birds that are just chilling underneath the water all the time. It's not really a thing that most birds are going to be doing. When you have birds that are sitting in the water, they're usually floating around on top of it. Think about the seagulls, think about the pelicans, think about the cormorants, things like that. Where they're mostly interacting with that top layer of the water where that oil is going to be aggregating. So they end up interacting with the oiliest part of it. But they're also oftentimes eating things that are from elsewhere in the water column. They're eating fish that are, from all sorts of depths. They're eating shellfish. They're eating crustaceans and things like that are down from the bottom. And so they get this really weird kind of cross-section of the environment that they interact with that a lot of kind of similar stuff doesn't. And that's just talking about the straight-up ingestion of the oil, kind of. Where birds also particularly suffer is pretty they tend to do worse than most other animals when it comes to just being like covered in oil as well. Um, I mean, there's not an animal out there that's like, yeah, I want to be covered in oil. Like, it's not a thing that any animal is happy to have. But birds have this really interesting thing, particularly kind of aquatic birds, where the being coated in oil really, really negatively affects one, like their ability to like live their lifestyle because it can affect their ability to fly for one. But it also really negatively affects the thermodynamics of it. When you're an aquatic bird and you're something that is like wet all the time but like not underwater, um, you're liable to get pretty chilly if you don't take measures against that. And so that's why you'll see a lot of birds, a lot of aquatic birds specifically, will have pretty specialized adaptations, like the way their feathers are organized. They have these downy undercoats. They have all these oils that they like secrete and rub all over their feathers. They have this very specific outer coat of feathers. All that stuff is designed to let them get wet but not stay wet. Birds, bird feathers are designed in such a way to slough water off of them quickly, because if you're just sitting there wet, you're gonna get cold, you're gonna get hypothermia. And so, like I said, getting covered in oil changes that, because it changes the way that your feathers are gonna sit. And like I said, part of this like way of maintaining your relative dryness is tied very specifically to the structure of your feathers, to having this like downy undercoat underneath that's trapping air in it, and then having this kind of thicker overcoat of feathers that kind of repels water in and of itself. So it ends up working a lot like a wetsuit does, basically. I guess a dry suit in this case. Very similar way to like a sea otter's coat would be oriented, but kind of in a, like I said, using feathers instead of fur. And so as an example, I have a few feathers in front of me, and these are all feathers from birds we have here at the Headwaters Science Center. So I have two that are from O'Reilly. O'Reilly is our red-tailed hawk that lives here at the Science Center. O'Reilly is one of our rescue birds. He has part of his wing amputated, is why he lives here. He's not gonna ever be released back out into the wild. He wouldn't survive out there. But what I want to do is just do a quick little illustration here. I think I'll use this one. It's a little rattier feather. And Lee did this yesterday as well, where what he did was he took a feather from a bird. He used one of Popey's, one of our cockatiel's feathers yesterday. I'm going to use a little bit bigger one. You just dip it in water. And you pull it out. And like I can touch this and like, yeah, there's a little moisture that's kind of congregating at the end here. But, I dipped it in 4 inches deep and it mostly just feels dry when I pull it out. I said birds have oils that they produce and like deliberately spread around their bodies when they're preening that, along with the structure of the feather itself, make it really hard for water to cling to it, make them kind of hydrophobic in and of themselves. But the other thing that Lee did was he poured a little bit of this canola oil, and we'll do that too, again, just for the sake of, I think it was a good visual. And what you'll see is that as I pour this oil in, it's going to congregate, again, at the very top. So you might see some bubbles go towards the bottom there as I was pouring, but even, just a couple seconds later, there's just a solid layer of yellow on the top there. And now if I dip this into the water, and you can see how it is no longer sloughing off all that moisture. And some of that is that the oil itself is sticking to it. Some of that is that the oil has a bad effect on the oils that are on the feather itself. But you can imagine how a heavy feather like that might not be very useful for flying if you're a bird. Like if you're weighed down like that, it might make your lifestyle more difficult. And so that's part of the reason why the oil spills can be problematic for birds. Is that element of it, just because like the structure of oil is different than the structure of water, and the way that it the way the molecules are arranged to the degree that like it doesn't work, the hydrophobic qualities of the feather don't also apply to the oil. We'll put that aside for now. And one thing you might have also noticed is that I have another feather here, a little bit different one. And so this is a feather that is from Oswald, and Oswald is our great horned owl. Similar to my mount I have next to me here, this is also a great horned owl, a little bit different color than Oswald is, but he is a great horned owl as well I got next to me. And great horned owls are kind of interesting, and I think I briefly touched on this with Lee yesterday. I was behind the camera with him, so I was kind of shouting out stuff from behind the camera for him, as I often am during his shows. But the thing that is kind of cool about owl feathers is owls are really unique in that they have feathers that are not really hydrophobic in the way that most other feathers are. And the kind of result of that, the effect of that, is that owls are kind of interesting in that they actually like can't fly at all when they're wet, basically. Like they can't fly in the rain like a lot of birds can. Like if it's raining out, an owl just has to stay home. And the reason for that is kind of a structural one with the feather itself. And so what I'm going to do here, if you want to give me a minute, one, I'm going to go get another beaker of water here because I forgot to test my owl feather before I poured my oil into it. But I'm also going to switch our display over. I have a little microscope here next to me, and we're going to take a closer look at the owl feather and the red-tailed hawk feather against each other. So give me 30 seconds. Okay. A little bit bigger beaker, but same tap water in it that we had in the other one. And what we're going to do now is we're going to dip this owl feather in. So if you remember when I dipped the hawk feather in, when I pulled it out, it was like not really even like noticeably wet except at the very tip of the feather. When I dip this one in, I said I would expect, and I've never done this before. I've talked about it a bunch with folks here at the Science Center, but I've never actually done it. But what I expect I'll see, yeah, and I am a little bit here. It's honestly not quite as the effect that I thought it would be. It's not as wet as I was thinking it might be, but it definitely is more wet than what the hawk feather was after pulling it out, which is a testament probably to how specialized like normal bird feathers are, that, you know, even that difference is enough where it's like, well, if you get a little damp and you can't slough it off quickly, you can't fly, sorry. But what we're going to do now is we're going to take our feather and I'm going to throw it into the microscope here. Like I said, I got to hop around to the other side quick and switch my display. Running the show by myself, my own producer. And while I'm over here doing this, because you guys should still be able to hear me, Headwaters Science Center is open 7 days a week. So if you want to come by and visit with us, you can come and visit us Monday through Saturday from 9:30 to 5, Sunday from 1 to 5. We are open at all of those times. And if you come by at 3:30, we are doing these types of shows most days. And what I'm realizing here also is that my display for this microscope is on my monitor, so I can't actually see if I'm getting it into focus or not. One second. Spin my monitor around. Perils of doing live shows. Alright, now I can see what I'm looking at, so hopefully we can actually get a decent view of this feather now. It is working, we are getting our feed from it. There we go. Cool. And what we're seeing on here is, you can probably, here we'll use, oops. So we're looking at right now, if you look, especially like kind of right around, can I get in there? Right around in this area, you can probably see what almost looks like kind of hair that's on the feather. There's a certain like fuzziness that owl feathers have, and that's for a couple reasons. One is that it helps them retain heat, so owls are kind of interesting in that they are not migratory, like really to any major degree, a lot of them. And so being a bird that is able to like survive up in as cold a climates as they do without migrating north and south seasonally, you need kind of specialized like dry land temperature control. And so having that little bit of extra fluff on your outer feathers helps with that. The other thing that's probably more important for these guys as far as having this fuzz on their feathers is that it's what helps them fly quietly. And we'll compare that to a red-tailed hawk feather. And so it's a much smoother feather. You don't see really any of that like fuzziness on it. Until you get, you know, way down at the base, you see some of kind of fuzzy elements of it. But up here, you don't see any of that. Like I said, it's because the red-tailed hawks are, you know, less reliant on flying quietly than they are at being very, you know, quick, nimble, agile flyers. Owls are cool in that I don't want to say they're bad flyers, they're very specialized flyers, but they're very slow flyers. Literally, the slowest flying birds in the world are owls. And that's just because they're built different. They're specialized a different way than most other birds are. And so, we're going to swap back to main cam here, and I have one more little visual aid for you. One second. We're back. All right. I'm gonna push this back a little ways. Hopefully not knock my microscope off. It's connected to my cart. And so, kind of an illustration of the way this works is I have here 2 lengths of rope. Okay. Do a little self-production and direction here. I have 2 lengths of rope here. One that has a frayed end, one that does not have a frayed end. And we can think of this in the context of the owl feather and the hawk feather together, where this one with the frayed end would sort of represent the owl feather, and this one with the non-frayed end would represent the hawk feather. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start spinning these, and I'm going to spin this one first. And what you're going to see, and hopefully hear, depending on how I have my noise gate settings set, is you can probably, well, maybe you can't even see it. Maybe I'm spinning it fast enough that my camera is not even really picking it up at the frame rate we're going at, but you might be able to hear it on the microphone. If I shut up for a second. And what you saw there is I could spin it quite fast, and you could hear the noise coming through the air as I was doing so. Now I'm going to try the same thing with this. You know, same length of rope, but frayed at the end. And again, I don't necessarily know what's going to come through on the other side of the camera here, but what I'm experiencing is I'm having a much, much harder time spinning this piece of rope quickly. I can't spin it nearly as fast, but even on my end, even without having to feed it through a microphone out to you guys, like even just hearing it right in person, I can't hear any noise coming off of this rope. Like I'm going as fast as I can, and I can hear my keys jingling in my pocket, but I can't hear the noise that this rope is making. And so that's a good illustration of what is going on here with the owl feather versus the hawk feather. The hawk is built for speed over stealth. The owl is built for stealth over speed. It's a trade-off that happens, and so if you honestly were to ask my opinion on it, I think hawks are a lot more successful class of birds than what owls are. But owls are cool and interesting, and I like cool, interesting birds, even if they're not quite as successful as some others. But anyway, like I said, the Headwaters Science Center is open 7 days a week, 9:30 to 5, Monday through Saturday, 1 to 5 on Sundays. Swing by anytime we're open. Like I said, come by at 3:30. We do these shows most days. We used to do them every day. We're only doing them most days now. But anyway, swing by, say hi to me, say hi to some of the other staff, and we will see you when we